Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice, I'm so excited. I could burst to intro my bestie from across the globe. Scott Stevenson joins us for a very hot topic. I'm sure you'll agree, Scott.
Yeah, it is. It's hot. It's like a hot potato that you don't want to put in your hands. But it's super important.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back now because I've been at this for a hot minute, pardon the pun there. And this GLP-1 agonist, semaglutide in particular, there's some other forms. I don't think we need to get into the woods on all the biology and the pharmacology, et cetera, with those. But as far as sort of substances, drugs that take bodybuilding by or trendy types of things. This one's as big as they get. Like there's like, I mean, creatine was kind of a big deal, and that like everyone's like creatine.
Yeah.
That was a different animal. Like this is a big, like we talked about an elephant in the room. Like this is a big, steaming, stinky elephant that's been, in the dirty river, covered with mud, has taken a dump in the room, right? And in certain ways, and it's like, okay, we got to talk about this. We got to do something about the elephant here. At least the way I'm kind of seeing it, because it's just being used. The GLP-1 agonists are just being used to such a large extent, we don't even know. I mean, eventually, hopefully, someone will do some studies and gather some direct information. But yeah, it's a big one. It's a big topic.
Yeah, it is. And I really like how because we talked about it over voice note, and it's stuck in my mind, as do lots of things that you say, where it's this discomfort avoidance. I really liked that. You know what I'm like with certain phrases, I'm like, that's
Hmm.
going to stay in my mind. And when we think about this from a bodybuilding perspective, I've always been in the bodybuilding realm because I'm sort of seeking that discomfort. I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to be a better bodybuilder and understand what I can gain from the depths of hunger, fatigue, all of these things that we experience, of course, in the preparation. And then obviously we've got the other side of it. And something that's quite interesting to sort of, I guess, start here would be to share with you essentially. In my last prep, my coach suggested using this, GLP-1 in the reverse
Hmm.
out. And I was like,
Hmm.
absolutely not. It's not
Ah,
not my vibe to use it at all anyway.
yeah.
I personally, I like sitting with that, and it's really rough at times, the reverse out, as you know. However,
Hmm.
I'm not prepared to use something to just, nip at the hunger, and that was my second sort of experience with understanding a bit more about it.
Yeah. So I have an analogy that I think will stick with people. I actually I can't, when I started thinking about it, there's a number of analogies that I've used over the years in the context of the discomfort and the value in experiencing discomfort. And one of the ones that I've used is running a marathon. So we'll step outside the bodybuilding realm for a little bit. And there are probably many listeners who've run marathons or at least have appreciation for running a marathon's a big deal, right? It's a source of pride. I ran a marathon, did a marathon. Not everyone can run a marathon. Running a marathon is an impressive feat, right? So imagine someone they're just sort of a recreational runner. They go out and they run 3, 4, 5 miles. Maybe they do a 5K just for shits and grins, just because they're going to run anyway that day. And they get to where I did an 8 mile run today. I felt really good. And then they said, I think I'm going to go for like a half marathon. And they do a half marathon. That's a challenge. They're proud of themselves for having done that. It creates a sense of self-efficacy because they know they can do things. They've done something they've never done before, and they overcame that challenge. And then that becomes something that's not so much of a challenge for them because they've already done it. Maybe they do a few of those. And this is a common progression. I've talked to innumerable people over the years. A lot of people in the exercise physiology world in academia are endurance athletes. Many of my fellow students were. So a lot of them had done this very same thing. Maybe if they came from cycling, but this is the common path. And then they start training like, okay, now I got to do a marathon. And most people, when training for a marathon, they don't actually run a whole marathon in their training. They work their way up to longer runs. And one of the things that happens, for instance, there is that you run into a glycogen issue in muscle and you will bonk, right? You heard about the bonk. So that's where some of the early studies with glycogen supercompensation came into play, and we've taken from the information for carbohydrate loading for bodybuilding purposes. So then you got to figure out like how in the heck do I get past the bonk? I got to, figure out what to carb up. Am I going to eat spaghetti or do I need to eat highly branched cyclic dextrins nowadays or what have you? And then you start running into like overuse injuries. Like, okay, so what kind of footwear do I need? Right? And or maybe I should run like do you remember there was someone this is before your time this named Zola Budd. She was an Australian middle distance runner who beat Mary Decker Tab, who was an American middle distance runner who was like the bomb. But she was a barefoot runner.
Oh,
So people are like, oh, maybe we should be running barefoot. Is that part of the why she's so good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to go dig in on what's the best technology for your feet. Do I move to barefoot running? Do I run with Vibrams? Do I go with this, that, and the other? There's a whole thing that you can deal with there, and you really dig in on understanding how do I use this technology to accomplish my goal, to overcome this challenge that I have. Then you got to figure out like what clothing you're going to wear. Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be sunshine? Do you need to wear glasses? What glasses do I get? All these sorts of things, right? And then along the side of this, you have all these mental challenges. Like, okay, I've run up to 20 miles, 21 miles. I'm going to have to push really hard. Those are hard runs, stuff you've never done. Like, this is an extraordinary cognitive challenge, right? And a lot of being able to run that marathon is just building up that cognitive resilience, that mental resilience to know you can do this. So eventually you go and you run the marathon. You do it. You're like, hell yeah, this is awesome. Like maybe you get a tattoo, right? This is your thing, right? Did the Boston, a lot of Ironman triathletes that get the Ironman triathlon tattoo. That's the thing. And understandably so, right?
yeah.
Same kind of thing. We'll just think about the marathon now. And then what if someone said, it's 26.2 miles, right? And all the mental difficulty of having to do like, what if we could just alleviate that? I got two options for you. How about roller skates? You can just roller skate your way through, right? You don't got to run hardly at all. Or maybe we'll just put you in a wheelchair,
Mm,
right? Or when it gets really hard, like when it's in those last few miles, when you really have to push yourself, where you think back, like wasn't sure if I could do this, and I kept doing it. Someone just comes along, sweeps you up on a wheelchair, and you get the 26.2 miles. You cover the distance, physically speaking. Is that the same thing? No. You were robbed of the rewards of the endeavor in doing that. And the analogy I'm trying to make here is that one of the things that makes for those who are focused on the process itself about bodybuilding so rewarding, so intrinsically valuable, is the struggle that needs to be overcome. And I'm no psychologist, but there's some information that I've looked at over the years that suggests that when someone sees the pathway itself value as being valuable, they also value the effort and the struggle.
yeah.
But if they just want to get to the end, then that's just a pain in the ass. Put me in the wheelchair, right? I don't want to have to deal with the aching feet, and aching legs, and feeling dizzy, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the, and this isn't a judgment, but that's sort of the decision making process that is to be had here. Is do you want to run the marathon, or do you want to make it through 26.2 miles, the easiest way possible, or with some alleviation of that struggle? So maybe use small amounts, only in the last 4 weeks. Where do you draw the line?
Mm,
And there are all sorts of analogies that are sort of related to that I've used. Like one would be climbing Mount Everest,
yeah.
like incredible feat. But you can take a helicopter ride and get to the top of Mount Everest, and it's beautiful,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm at the top. Look how awesome this is. I took a selfie, here I am.
Yeah.
But climbing Mount Everest without oxygen, let's say, or what have you, like it's a totally different challenge. Or another one that is a very common one is cars. So someone might buy a nice car, and for them, if they worked their ass off and getting that car was something that they had worked for, that car is valuable. But let's imagine someone who buys, they just like sports cars. It's not a big deal for them to have it's like this is not the trophy that came at the end of having worked for years to climb the corporate ladder or to be able to afford that car. They just buy the car
Mm,
and compare that. It's just kind of given to them. It comes to them. They haven't valued the process of earning the money to get there versus someone who said, and I've had friends do this. I had a friend who did this with a motorcycle. They built the car from scratch. Like they got a kit car, right? Or they bought a car that was just a clunker and they didn't know what they're doing and they figured out system by system how to replace all those things. They went to the junkyard and got the extra axles, and they went on eBay and they found an air conditioning system and all the things, and they learned. And then after 3 or 4 years of effort and insight, they've become knowledgeable in so many other things, just like that marathon runner who now knows which shoes work for them. They tried all the shoes that didn't work, all the ones that did, different types of clothing, wicking clothing, blah, blah, blah.
mm,
That person who built the car, when they have that, they're driving that car around, a totally different sense of what that car is to them.
mm,
So that's really, I think, where we stand because the GLP-1 agonists, and the science really supports this. There's a little bit of science, rodent data, for instance, suggesting it might have an impact on metabolic rate, so speeding, fat burning, or what have you. But mostly the primary action that's involved there is minimization or to some degree almost elimination of hunger, right? It goes away, just like hopping in the wheelchair,
yeah.
right? So now there's no exertion. There's nothing. So the danger there, and sorry, I'm just kind of rambling here, but the danger there is that if someone, let's say, had an experience or is doing their first competition prep, whereby they might do that, and people sometimes after the first show they're like, screw this, I'm never doing this again, or some people like they get the bug, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they were to have this experience without a GLP-1 agonist, and they then really value the struggle because it increases their self-efficacy. You're like, you know what? If I did that, I can do friggin' everything. The rest of my life is easy. I can overcome this challenge, that challenge, that challenge. But let's say they don't have that struggle with hunger, and they go through and they get in really good shape, and it was just an absolute breeze. They're going to value that process less because it came so easily. And then bodybuilding may not be something that they ever do again. They may lose out on the ability in the future to reap the rewards of bodybuilding in that sense because it's no longer a valuable struggle to them. It's just easy. And it's sort of like the kids that just get given things like, okay, it's your 16th birthday and here you go,
Mm, mm,
there's a brand new whatever car. And I remember my parents did this to me. I'm very happy for it. Like I had to earn through allowance my first car is a 1976 Mercury Monarch. Float like a moth, float like an anchor, sting like a moth is what we used to say. The thing wouldn't go faster than 50 miles an hour, but that car was mine. And I love that car. It's maybe the favorite of all the vehicles I've had and RVs. I love that car.
mm.
And my parents knew what they were doing. I valued that. So that's something that could be lost through the GLP-1 use. So anyway, I have other thoughts, but I don't want to keep rambling because I thought about this a lot. This is a really important topic.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about, the marathon, Everest, the building of the car in particular, I could see it within you. It's the pride you get, the
Yeah.
and I feel
Hmm.
like that certainly for me on this pursuit, I feel so proud every time I step on stage because you've overcome, obstacles outside of hunger, let alone what you have to go through these thought processes. Sometimes it's quite dark spaces for people that haven't experienced hunger to this level. The exertion, the fatigue, everything that clocks up. And then there's this expectation of then doing a peak and stepping on stage, and particularly the first time, it's like, whoa, this whole experience. And as you say, it misses that. And it's like beauty in the struggle, isn't it? Of
Hmm.
that pride to go, I've got through those really tough days. And I also feel as well, Scott, that the hunger management side of things, that actually over the course of being a competitor, that there is this bit of a almost a sadistic type, you almost get off on it a bit, and you're like, I'm cool, I can sit with hunger,
Hmm.
and the self-value that comes from that, and it's something I try and install in my clients to, this is leading towards your goal of the ultimate goal of stepping on stage and the personal progression we can get from that. Because maybe outside of this, right, like non-bodybuilders might think, oh, it's just dealing with hunger. But they haven't been there. They haven't been to those depths of the real, like,
Yeah.
whoa, it's tugging at everything within you because it's not normal pushing to those depths of those levels of lean. But when you do it and you come out the other side, it's like a badge of honor, right? That pride.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's that aspect, and then there's the things that you learn um, that are innumerable. I've had so many different insights that have happened to me over course because every prep's a little bit different. The perspective that you can gain, and you can think about this from the marathon runner's perspective too. When they've run through that period where they barely feel like they can take a step, and then they've recovered, then for instance that person might be like, I can walk. I'm not in a wheelchair. I should be absolutely grateful and have gratitude for just simply being able to stand and move around.
Yes.
And I spent some time doing research with people with spinal cord injuries, people a little bit of that. Not that many of those folks see themselves as being handicapped because they don't, and many of them are not even in the least. I mean, technically speaking, yes, but and then in dieting down, you see, and I mentioned this, I think, in my Beer and Bodybuilding Coach book, is like it's really quite an honor to be able to restrict your food in a world where some people just can't find enough food or can't choose what food they're eating and can't use protein powder or highly branched all the all the high tech supplements that we have. So once you're in that and you maybe have a little bit of a pity party and like I'm so hungry, and you realize doing this to myself. I've mentioned this so many times on the podcast, but I'm doing this. I've chosen this as like I should really feel quite lucky. And in that space of pain, and I always differentiate between pain and suffering. Suffering is when you don't want to be in pain, and pain is just pain, right? And you don't necessarily have to suffer when you're in pain if you've chosen to do this. But if you start to slide into suffering and you can then differentiate between those two in that space, that creates a certain clarity and gratitude that will carry over to the rest of your life, right? And you like maybe you see like an example of things that has happened to me. You're dieting down, you feel like you're quote unquote starving, and you see a homeless person on the side of the street who just wants food.
I do this.
Yeah, and you feel so much more empathy for that person. And then when you come out of the prep, hopefully some of that remains. You
Yeah.
become a more empathetic person. That's something that won't happen if you've eliminated the struggle of that hunger.
Mm, mm.
Because the trophy, so to speak, the reward is just given to you. And but the point I'm making here is that you're not going through that process. It's the process. It's being hungry repeatedly and having to manage that psychologically, physiologically. Like how do I shift my foods? How do I space my meals? All those sorts of things. Each of those has their own rewards, and you miss out. Like this is one of the key features. That's why I use the marathon analogy. The key feature of this is that you're running this distance,
Yeah.
right? And then when you don't run it, it's not a marathon anymore, right? So if you're not dieting because it doesn't because you there isn't some self-imposed restriction there because you're not hungry. If you're not hungry, you're not restricting. There's one way to sort of look at it,
Yeah.
is in
Yeah.
a certain way the food has gone down, but if you're not restricting and then you're not dieting, it's not a diet.
Mm, mm. Yeah.
In a
Yeah.
certain way, it is a diet, and that diet is whatever you're eating where you're changing your macros, so you're changing your diet, but it's not a prep diet per se in that sense, psychologically, maybe even spiritually. There's some things that happen there where it's transformative. I think that you could say is in a spiritual way.
Mm.
So there's just and everyone has their own like the other way I look at this is like literally there's a spectrum. Some people are purely looking for cosmetic changes. Like it's very much bodybuilding in a certain sense is a beauty contest.
Yeah.
Um, there's a paper that came out a few years back, and the paper goes through the various arguments for and against the idea of bodybuilding being a sport.
Yeah.
right? Is it really a sport? Like it's an aesthetic, subjective comparison. There is a performance aspect you have to be able to pose, but it's maybe even more of an art form in a certain way. But is it a sport? It's a really interesting paper. I was thinking through the details of the paper. So
Yeah, I
on the
do.
one on the one end, yeah, I know, get back on track, Scott. On the one end, we have people like literally, and I imagine it would be interesting to do this as a questionnaire. If you could just snap your fingers and just be transformed into contest shape, would you do it? A lot of hell yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like without a doubt, right? And like, I mean, part of me says, yeah, that would be awesome. Of course, right? That's cool as shit.
Mm,
Um, and then at the other end of the spectrum, there are people that are much more process focused, right? And for them, like me, this is what the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach is about. This is a smaller percentage, I think, of the bodybuilding population. I'm learning year after year and year after. I think it's smaller, smaller, and smaller. And it's probably getting smaller,
yeah.
maybe because of things like GLP-1 agonists that disallow people from seeing how valuable the process can be. But along that spectrum, everyone's going to have to kind of choose for themselves what they want to do.
Mm, mm,
Um, there's some interesting literature too. Like, it's a mixed bag. There was one study that it was contradicted, but if you look at lottery winners, just given all this money that they didn't earn, so to speak,
mm,
they just played the lottery. One study suggested that their happiness isn't any greater like a year and a half later after winning the lottery. And other studies show that that's the case. And there's research showing that money does actually improve happiness up to some point, 75,000 dollars a year, and then eventually it tapers off. Once you get above like $200,000 a year in US dollars, then you're not anymore happy. But the other thing that's really interesting too is the same thing goes with plastic surgery in
okay.
terms of the rates of body dysmorphia. There's some evidence suggesting that when people go in and get plastic surgery done, this is not everyone, but there's some segment where the plastic surgery, which just happens. I think there is some suffering that happens after plastic surgery, right? You know, oh yeah, yeah, like the swelling and everything else. I've seen people in my acupuncture practice too, like back in the year, like if they got all this swelling, so we treat that in various ways. Um, but the change, the transformation is sort of done for them. It's not, weeks and weeks and weeks. It just happens. And that doesn't necessarily change body dysmorphia, ratings of body dysmorphia, or happiness, so to speak, in that sense.
Mm,
So that's worth considering when you're thinking about something like I think there's an analogy with GLP-1 agonists in that they're allowing you, it's not like you're hopping in a time machine and you're just springing forward to being in contest shape 14 weeks later. It's not like the snap of a finger or, a surgical transformation that happens. But it certainly lessens the difficulty in getting from point A to point Z at the end. And the question is then, this is just for people to think about, is to what degree is bodybuilding for you a way of gaining immediate gratification in
mm,
all sorts of ways, right? What is this about just finding gratification or evoking a sense of pleasure as opposed to trying to find some sense of long-standing happiness? Or you have a depth of self-esteem and self-efficacy. So knowing you can do things
mm,
upon which you can rest that buoys you throughout the day. You know who you are. I,
mm.
I saw it was kind of a Zen koan type of statement it was a couple months ago now, but it stuck with me. And it was something like I'm gonna bastardize, I'm gonna brutalize it here, but it was something like the bird sitting on a branch doesn't concern itself with the branch breaking
Mm,
because he knows he can always fly away,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Mm,
So the analogy there with bodybuilding and with dieting down is once you've learned how to fly through life's difficulties, which is what bodybuilding allows us to do in a modern society where we're not challenged so often. You have those wings to do that. So you walk through life and it's like I'm going to handle that. I got this shit. I've been through much worse. Another analogy that like came to my head when I was thinking about this is like, and I know you probably experienced this. You go to a restaurant, let's say, right? And you order your food. You're not necessarily in prep or anything like that. You're not dieting down, but you're hungry. You're ready to eat. But you're well fed. And they drop you're like for whatever reason this happens. You're the last. Everyone else gets their food, and you're sitting there just waiting, right? It's like okay. Sometimes they forget your meal. That happens, or they bring you the wrong thing. It's like, no, that's not really what I wanted to get. So you have to wait an extra half an hour,
Yeah.
right? And then for that moment, you're like, you see all this food, you smell all this food, you start getting a Pavlovian salivary response. You're getting hungrier,
Yeah.
and then if you've been through preps, you're like, well, this is what I got. I got 20 minutes to wait, so I'm going to eat. This is nothing. It's so much easier. So that's a direct example where, like, oh my gosh, this is a breeze. This is nothing for me.
Yeah.
So you would miss out on that if you hadn't had those. In my case, it's been years of experience being hungry during preps over the course of over 20 years. Like that's a blip in the radar. That's almost like it doesn't even matter to me because I've done that thousands of times basically, where I've sat through meals, eaten my chicken and rice or whatever it was, and still been hungry and just went about my day.
Mm.
So knowing you can fly in those moments, right? Or knowing you're on the branch, right? And you're eating, but if there's no food available, it's not going to be like, oh shit, I'm going to die. You're
Yeah.
like, this is fine,
And
I'll eat
the
nothing.
It's well, yeah, and the appreciation for food, like, even because I'm, as you know, I'm in a diet at the moment, and I love eating, even though it's very little at the moment. Every meal, I'm present with the meal. I sit and I chew it, and I just, yeah, my appreciation for food is there. And when I found over the years, I've certainly gravitated away from the sort of like wanting to just eat a house of junk food, as it were. I'm not trying to label foods here or anything like that. But for me
Right.
now, it's like I would really love to, off the back of this, Matt and I go and sit and have a nice meal at a nice restaurant and they bring it out. And, you start to build this almost, I guess, appreciation for the finer foods outside of prep as well. And over
Mm-hmm.
time that comes, right? Like when you first start out, we all do the whole overeating, etc., and all of these.
Mm.
Hence why in the reverse out, maybe people consider GLP-1. But it certainly brings a different outlook on food for me personally, anyway. And it's something I try and speak about because you just get this like, oh, well, I've been hungry for X amount of time. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
how nice is it to sit and have a meal?
Mm-hmm.
It,
Yeah. Yeah.
it,
It totally shifts your perspective and your gratitude. There's a couple other things that are even like that relate to the GLP-1 use as we're seeing it now. And something worth mentioning is like you said in your gym, like there's tons of people that are
Mhm,
using it.
mhm.
I'm seeing with clients and with coaches who have lots of clients that this is just being prescribed or they're getting it as a research chemical. It's being used all over the place. And there's a couple other bodybuilding substances that I think I've seen over the years that have played analogous roles. Or basically, the history repeats itself. Was what you could say. One thing I've known for decades now. I've seen this time and time again. But this is not an obvious phenomenon because the people to whom this happened they go away. They're vanished is guys who start off and they start using gear very early on in their bodybuilding career, right? And there are many guys that I know of who and a lot of them you don't see them very much, but for years they would only train unless when they are on gear.
Okay, yeah,
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 that's a really common thing. Like when they're off, they would just come off and they would vacillate back and forth. And a lot of these guys did that in their 20s and then in their 30s and 40s they stopped training. They're gone. And I know some of these guys. For instance, a friend of mine who's back in Arizona, where I used to live. There's guys who fall. It's a very, very, very common pattern
yeah.
because they were doing things in an assisted way, which made growing muscle, gaining muscle, much, much easier to do.
More exciting.
More exciting, right? You're lighting up your reward centers of your brain, right? It comes to you easily. Like you don't even have to do, I mean, you can train half-heartedly potentially, depends on your responsiveness, but it makes everything easier. So you don't develop you miss out if you do that, you miss out on developing that baseline love for training and respect. And like you're saying with food, relative gratitude. It's like, I'm just glad I can train. And it's nice to, have gone up just, an extra 2.5 on each side of the bar each time, as opposed
Biscuits.
to I'm going up 25 each time, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it changes your relationship with training and bodybuilding if you started off doing it assisted.
Mm,
And the common suggestion, recommendation was, train at least 4 or 5 years, right? Get everything you possibly can, get come close somewhat to your natural limit, and then maybe make the switch to the dark side. So that's one analogy. I think what can happen here with GLP-1s then is people don't diet down, or they don't learn how to construct a diet.
yeah,
They
yeah.
don't all they miss on all those skills. And this is what happens. You see this in the research studies and the studies where they've taken people off the GLP-1 agonists. Their body weight then comes back.
Mm,
So I mean, as an aside, you've got the perfect drug dealer scenario here, where the person basically becomes dependent upon the drug for, in this case, having reached those body composition goals for being leaner. And especially when this is your self-image, who you are, you look in the mirror, you now have become that person who's lost X number of pounds. Let's not even talk about or competitive bodybuilders here. That's who you are now. And when that starts to slip, people stop complimenting you on like, oh, you look great, blah, blah, blah. You haven't got the skills to maintain that.
yes.
And also, it's a whole other ball game when all of a sudden now you don't have the hunger suppression. Like, what the fuck do? You go right back on the GLP-1s. Just like the guy who trained with gear, he got really big. He comes off the gear, he starts to lose the size. Like then he looks in the mirror, the body dysmorphia says, "Oh fuck, I got to go back on," and those guys will stay on for forever. And that's totally a personal decision. What's worth noting here is that this is the dynamic that you could fall into if you decide to take that plunge. So I
Mm,
feel like, I'm like, don't worry that SLP is like a gateway drug, or GLPs are like a gateway drug, but there's that kind of phenomenon that could happen.
mm,
Hopefully I'm not I'm not foreseeing the future, but
mm, mm.
it seems like that's a possibility. Another another form of pharmaceutical use in bodybuilding, like it's one of my kind of favorite topics, my hobby horse topics, is peak week. And I've got a method in my book that I put forth. It's also in a review article for 2021. Escalante is the first name on that, where you can manipulate water using caffeine, using B vitamins, using vitamin C. I've done this, I've been doing this for decades and decades. Personally, with my athletes, you can get really, 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 really dry, but there has to be more effort involved,
Mm,
right? You have to do a practice run, or you should do a practice run. It's not like you have to have to be able to do high level calculus and be able to construct a rocket in your backyard and launch it to the moon. It's not that difficult, but there's more effort in that than just in taking a diuretic or taking diuretic starting the week out. And the interesting thing about the phenomenon is, I mean, like as an example, Dave Henry, someone I worked with for years, and I would hear from Dave and his wife at the time too, like they would say, "Dave, what diuretics did you take?" And he'd say, "I don't take any diuretics," and no people wouldn't believe him. They just wouldn't believe him. And Dave's a freak, right? So, I'm not saying everyone's going to look like Dave, but I hear consistently from people about my book, and it's happened consistently. Almost, there's some examples or exceptions to that rule, and that would be for another podcast. But there is a way to get this done, but it requires more effort. There's a way to get really, really lean,
mm,
but it requires more effort.
mm.
And we are generally creatures of immediate gratification, and it's a human attribute to try to find the easiest way
Yeah.
that makes sense to some degree,
Mm,
unless we see value in the path,
mhm, mm.
right? The thing that's interesting, and this is why I draw this analogy or pull out this comparison with diuretic use and peak weeks. Actually, just literally this morning, I was listening to a German podcast, and they were reporting about a Brazilian bodybuilder, 30 years old, who died during a contest. They couldn't tell if he died backstage or if he was on stage and died, but he died presumably of a heart attack. The autopsy wasn't something they reported on, but chances are we know what had likely happened there. This is happening more and more and more. There's known risks. We don't have to go into all that, but there's one of the biggest immediate killers, short-term killers of bodybuilders during their careers is diuretic use. I don't think anyone's going to argue against that. Maybe long term, you stay on, the cardiovascular risk factors can play a role. People die of heart attacks, what have you. But diuretics there is an inherent obvious danger there.
Yeah.
Can be done in different ways, but there's an option to not use diuretics, but people don't want to do that. This has just been in my little microcosm, my little bubble. People don't
I
want to do
see it.
that.
I see it.
So you can get absolutely shredded. There's thousands and maybe even hundreds of thousands of examples of bodybuilders getting absolutely shredded using no GLP-1 agonist. It can be done. You can get dry as a tumbleweed. You can get crispy as all hell. It can happen without using pharmaceutical diuretics. It can be done. But most people use pharmaceutical diuretics. It's kind of the standard.
Mm-hmm.
I have the sense now, looking forward, that because GLP-1s are there, it's easier. It's a pill. You just take it. It does what it does. Maybe you have to microdose it or whatever. There's some strategy just with diuretics, but it's an easier way out. More people will do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because they're not interested in what happens. Like I have several clients that I do largely just peak week consultations with. I love working with these guys, or mainly guys, because they're so interested, what if I do this and I change this carb source? And they really are intrinsically interested in tweaking all the variables
Yeah.
as opposed to, okay, let's just take a diuretic, right?
For sure.
So, and the thing is too, I think I get the sense that if someone, like let's say their first coach was this way, or they just started off taking diuretics, that's what they will tend to do unless they see evidence to the contrary. I won't name any names, but there's someone I know very well who, longtime competitor, who it just used diuretics
Mm.
for years, and it was hit or miss. Diuretics can be very, very hit or miss. There's problems that are there, and then this person saw what I was able to do without the diuretics, and then switched to doing that, and highly favors that.
Oh, I
And
love.
this was someone who had decades of competitive experience before making that switch. But that was direct firsthand evidence of seeing it happen and then me helping with that individual,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we have coaches, for instance, and most coaches are working remotely, the way we think of a coach is typically it's a remote person. Otherwise, it'd be your trainer, really. Maybe your coach, but your trainer. Those people aren't going to be there, for instance, when you walk into the gym and you're just dragging ass and say, you know what? When you make it through this, you're going to be one badass motherfucker because you're going to have done some shit,
Yeah.
right? Don't forget that. You got this shit. Come on, let's go get some shit done. That doesn't necessarily, you can't convey that. Maybe with video calls and those sorts of things, but it's not the same. So to impress upon someone who is that, this is a more valuable route to take to really get after it and develop the resilience, the fortitude, the internal mental strength to push your way through a diet is intrinsically valuable, and it's something that I value and I think you will come to value as well. That's not going to be had in today's environment when people are like, let's try this GLP-1 agonist versus this, or this is how I dose it whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're just looking for the easiest way through. So I have the sense that, like diuretics,
Mm.
GLP-1 agonists will just become a standard. And it will create a scenario where people miss out on all those things they could learn about themselves and about how to diet more effectively. I mean, practically speaking, like one of the things that's important, and for years and years, I would track my macros and do all that sort of thing and plan all that. And then after a while, I kind of protein, of course, was important, and I would vary that, in different preps. But I just knew how hungry I needed to be. right?
I love that.
I knew how hungry I needed to be. I mean, one of my rules of thumb is you should almost always be hungry during a prep, and then in your off season you should never not be, you should never be full, right? Like if you're doing it right. That's, sort of a gross generalization, but I was able to auto regulate my diet and how I dieted down based on how I felt
Mhm.
because I became in tune with that. Um, and that will be lost. And potentially, if someone is taking something that blunts their appetite, there's a potential to over diet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Very
But
easily.
I also feel as well, and this is what sort of sprung to mind for me, is that
Mm.
if you're doing this for an aesthetic goal to step on stage, essentially taking out micronutrients, protein, the things that we obviously it decreases over a prep, right? Because we go into more of a deficit. But
Yeah,
you're
unless you
taking out,
supplement.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you're taking out potentially, as you say, you can have supplements, but those micronutrients and protein and everything we sort of try and include in a bodybuilding diet. Do you have any thoughts around that if you were to replace that obviously with the GLP-1?
Replace
So
the.
if you're replacing the food, so the micronutrients, the protein, as much varied diet as you can for the aesthetic gut, because obviously you're trying to retain muscle tissue. If you're natural, maybe you're using the GLP-1 as well. Obviously, assisted is slightly different, but what could happen to the end physique result if you're taking out the food and replacing that with the GLP?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you would have to be this. The thing is, you have to be much more careful and systematic about how you reduce your caloric intake over time, and paying very close attention, of course, to what's happened to your body composition, your strength in the gym, all the markers to determine whether you're holding on to muscle. If you're a competitive bodybuilder, you've got those things in check for the most part, or you and your coach do. The thing that happens with lay people, in particular, those who aren't working out, they just take it is they start eating so little and they don't change their diet at all, right? So let's just take one simple example. A protein, gram for gram, calorie for calorie, is the most satiating of the
Mm,
three macronutrients of fat, carbohydrate, and protein.
yeah.
So well, let's just add water in the case too. So if you're dieting down and you realize that, well, one, I think I've read, I may have read this research that more protein is to my advantage while I'm dieting down, then you shift. You just take that simple thing and you realize, I mean, you get positive feedback. When I eat more protein, I'm less hungry. This helps me with my diet. It also helps me hold on to muscle mass, or at least it would. Most of the studies are with resistance exercise, but it's not a bad thing to have in place just from the dietary perspective. Also, it's important to be hydrated, of course. And I realize that, if I drink water, I get a little bit of a gastric stress, and I'm chugging gallons of water, but maintaining that maybe is a distraction. I learned that drinking water and keeping myself really hydrated helps with my hunger. So those are two healthy patterns that you develop as you're dieting down.
Mhm.
With the GLP-1s blunting your appetite, that stuff never comes on your radar
Yeah. Yeah.
because you don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And the thing I haven't had, I don't, the clients that I work with don't, are, a lot of times aren't lay people who would fall into this category. But the thing I'm hearing about sort of the lifestyle clients many times is that you run into, and I've heard there's also podcasts, you run into nutrient deficiencies, but people haven't paid, they're not used to paying attention to getting their micronutrients through their food, and they maybe don't even bother with supplementation in a way,
That's
and they
what
become
worries.
literally, it's so crazy that you would have nutrient deficiencies in a modern world like this,
Yeah,
right? Because
that's what
people
I
are
worry
taking
about.
drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's a
So,
shortcut, isn't it? It's the this is
mhm.
what I all the sort of buzzwords and people that are using it in my sphere, as it were. It's because they're like, oh well, I just want to lose weight. I can't really be fucked to diet. They just
Mhm.
want that outcome. And then the problem I
Right.
see also is the diet's really bad anyway, and they think, oh, I hardly eat anything, and they are, and it's this narrative we build of I don't eat anything, I can't lose weight, and they are, and you start to build in the narrative then that oh, okay, well I can take this remedy, this magic cure,
It's
and
a magic bullet.
yeah, this will take me to my goals. But then, Scott, what also worries me is then they're talking to other people. This is great. You should
Hmm.
try it. You should try it. And this is why you say it's a hot topic. It's an elephant in the room, but it's also a topic that needs to be talked about because you're gonna get like you describe sort of lay people and people that don't understand. And it's difficult sometimes, Scott, as a coach, to try and say the micronutrients, the protein, the boring is so good for you from a health standpoint, right? This is beyond
Hmm.
the bodybuilding prep, the stepping on stage. As we know, that's not necessarily a healthy endeavor towards the end.
Right.
Something I'm, passionate about it, and I frame it like this, and I have to explain it, of course, making the prep as healthy as possible, right? So not just going
Yeah.
completely void of everything, but what I see is there's this lack of want to even think about the health consequences, right?
Hmm.
And that's the worrying part for me. But then I also have to think about if someone doesn't care about their health, are they going to listen to people like us? And that's the worry when you got all people talking about it, in the sphere. I'll do that.
Hmm.
Sounds easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this kind of, there's two things that may be happening here. One is that when you take a GLP-1 agonist that ablates your hunger, you don't have to, there's no auto-regulatory information. Your body isn't telling you what it might need, what it might not need. You basically are just blocking all those signals. So there's nothing coming from your internal environment to say, you know what, if I eat more protein, that helps, or if I drink more water. And then those ideas, like, you know what, like, what else do I need to do while I'm at this? Those things would build upon themselves, and you would become educating yourself. You would start educating yourself. But in this case, if you're blocking all that, that whole educational pathway just never gets traveled,
Yeah,
right? And then secondarily, there's also the possibility that people who just are those who tend to look for the magic bullets are going to be the ones that aren't going to do those things anyway, too.
yeah, yeah,
So, and that's maybe even doubly dangerous, right? Because they do cause weight loss, and you really don't have to do anything. There's no there's a couple of the studies where they've done some dietary education initially, but the diets just changed because people aren't hungry.
yeah, yeah,
There's no cognitive behavioral changes that are happening whatsoever. I mean, it's the same as going into a rat and, ablating part of their hypothalamus, that's involved with appetite, and they just eat less.
yeah.
And that's essentially what's happening chemically in this case.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
so that's a dangerous path to go down, because unfortunately, I mean, most people who are going to take these drugs, like we use so many drugs. I think I've looked this up. If you look at, like, in 2024, the top 10 prescribed, the top 25 prescribed drugs, tirzepatide is in the top 10. Wegovy was number 4 in the U.S. So that's the one that can be prescribed for weight loss. Ozempic was like 25. That's another brand name of semaglutide. Wegovy is the fourth most prescribed drug in 2024 in the US.
That's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, I mean, it makes sense too. We have an obesity epidemic.
It's almost becoming normal.
It is normal. I mean, it's more than average in that sense, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And this is just because, I mean, there's numerous. This is what modern society does to us, I would say, in so many ways. So, I mean, you'll see. I was thinking about this morning. Like, people in the U.S. will they're at the mall or someplace where they go shopping. They will drive around for 5 minutes to find a parking place that would save them 1 minute of walking. That literally happens all the time. It's like, no, and you, like, during prep, you might tell your clients, it's like, no, gather those steps, right? Park as far away as you
Yes,
can,
yes, yes.
so, right? You try to do the opposite, but it's just normal human inclination, because in our evolutionary past, there was plenty of effort.
Yeah.
You're hunters and gatherers, there's plenty of exercise. So conserving energy made sense,
Mm,
right? We still have that energy conservation intuition, let's call it. I'm giving that's a very nice word for it. Drive, let's say, but it doesn't serve us these days. We want salty, fatty, sugary stuff. We eat those things in excess. At one point in time, if you looked at the literature, the creeping obesity we see in the US between the age of like mid 20s and the mid 50s, the increase in body fat, if you calculated it out, could be attributed to a caloric excess on a daily basis equivalent to about a saltine cracker.
Oh,
There's just a few calories, 12, 15 calories. So for the most part, our body will hang around a set point or a settling point, or will stay within these intervention points that sort of dictate where our body weight and body fat would stay. But over time, we just keep going that way, right? And evolution didn't take into account the idea that we could just have sloth everywhere. And we can be slovenly all over we can have sloth really continuously in many cases.
mm,
I mean, I see it down here. I'm not throwing stones at anybody, but I walk my dogs twice a day, and I see in Florida, it's just a thing to have golf carts. Everyone has these golf carts. And there's one guy who drives by with his dog and his golf cart. I think his dog can run, but I see people like I hardly see people walking their dogs. Everyone's in the golf carts going everywhere. It's like you could walk. I see people that they drive out with their car and they drive down to the neighbors like three doors down with their car, and then they come back like to borrow some sugar or something. I'm like, you could have walked.
yeah, yeah.
That person may have a handicap. Like I have no idea. I just see so much of it. It's like, okay, not everyone doesn't have a bad back. Well, that's probably most people do have a bad back,
But
but you get my point. It's like it's so common. It's like, ha. And it's different the issue is not as prevalent in Europe because
mm,
more people ride their bikes. They use public transportation where they have to walk to and from the bus stop or the train stop, and they have to walk from the train to wherever they're going.
mm,
So anyway, we've got a scenario where we don't have an internal. Unfortunately, we don't have many people don't have an internal higher level check
yeah,
on what is this really doing to me in the long run, and can I, if I were being a good parent to myself, would I let myself use these drugs? That's
yeah,
another way to check on it, you know.
yeah.
If you've got a kid, and there are, of course, genetics of obesity that can drive body weight up in a way that's like, just like, wow, this is just an almost unbeatable phenomenon. But childhood obesity is out of control too.
Mm, mm,
Um, and what's the best way to go about that? Can we change people's behaviors, or do we want to just become reliant upon another drug?
mm.
And in the U.S., apparently the answer is the latter. We want to rely upon another drug.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, you mentioned as well with, the long-term potential effects of using something like GLP-1 and actually having a conversation with a medical practitioner over here. And she
mm,
believes that in, a number of years, you'll start seeing people having to go to hospital because of the long-term use of GLP-1. But of course,
yeah,
until these epidemics happen, people just go along because their mate's using it, their coach wants them to use it, whatever. And they're not. And the thing is, in the bodybuilding space, I'm guilty of this. Using things like Clen, Yohimbine for a long time, high doses. I had, backlash off that at the time. You're like, fuck it. Being honest, because
right,
you're in a high,
right.
you're in the deficit, you're compromised, shall we say, etc., etc. So also we've got that sort of personality type as well, where it's like, oh,
Hmm.
but if I use this, I can get more shredded, perhaps. That could be a thought process as well, maybe for competitors.
Yeah, it's the thing that's difficult here, and this is why I've been maybe intentionally over dramatic in this podcast.
I love it.
Is Yeah, I mean, it's just to draw attention to things that can
Yeah.
kind of slide past our consciousness because it's not there's no contrast there per se in the context of all the other drugs. Yohimbene's over the counter here in the U.S. Like, so that's you can just buy that. You can order that on Amazon.
Yeah.
But let's take I just kick in with another analogy. Let's say you're someone who does your own landscaping at your house, right? And it's a way it will even it's kind of fits in with the idea of sloth and inactivity and not gathering neat non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you go and you have a lawnmower, right? You don't go out and chop the grass yourself, right? Maybe it's a gas-driven or electric lawnmower, but you actually mow the lawn. That's a tool. It makes it easier, right? You have trimmers. You're not breaking every branch on your bushes. Like if you look at modern landscaping, there's a whole lot of technology and tool use that goes into that,
Oh, yeah,
especially in the U.S., right?
yeah.
In places where people have lawns and bushes and lots of trees and the like. So you're using all those tools, and maybe you use clenbuterol or yohimbine or ephedrine or L-carnitine or whatever it might be. You have various things that you use, but you are the person running this show, right? You're making use of these tools and you're orchestrating your prep yourself. Um, and then there comes in another tool that you could use for your landscaping is your phone, and you just call someone to do it for you,
Yeah.
right? And the analogy is maybe, like I said, I'm over exaggerating here, but that person comes out and they do it. Like they just do all the things for you, and then that's a whole different deal. Then you're not doing things, and of course you still have to lift the weights. But if the hunger isn't there, then it really, and maybe you hire the, let's make a better analogy. Maybe you hire on the neighbor's kids to do it, and you give them the tools, right? And you show them how to work the lawnmower, and you just sit back on your lawn chair with a lemonade, and you watch them and tell them what to do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's maybe more akin to what happens with the GLP-1. So it's like as long as you know what you're doing,
Mm,
right? And you've decided to do that. If you think that there's intrinsic value, I mean, some people love to work in their garden, right? Some people love to do the landscaping. They have these trees that are just perfectly manicured. It's like, wow, that's beautiful what they've done. And they revel in that. And some people just want to have manicured lawns and they pay someone to do it,
mm,
right? And it's the same kind of thing. We see this spectrum in human behavior in various ways.
mm,
So the GLP-1s are like having someone else manicure your lawn to some degree, or hiring someone else to do the hard work. And if
mm,
you're okay with that, you're okay with that.
mm,
But in the long haul, just like potentially long-term use of GLP-1s, and when you come off your contest diet or when you come out of your contest, you may still be using those. And then next thing you know, you're doing what guys were doing with steroids. They're using and using and using and never coming off.
mm.
And then you've got a long-term issue. If you're the guy who sits on your lawn chair and you never mow your lawn, even though you're capable of it, year in and year out, next thing you know, you can't mow your lawn anymore
This is
because you don't have the physical ability to do it, right? It slides away from you. It's a slippery slope. But once you go down that path, realize that, hey, I know where I'm going. I'm going downhill in this direction. I can decide not to do that. And nowadays we have that opportunity. That's the beautiful thing. I don't think I've said that's really wonderful about bodybuilding is we have a life that can be so comfortable in so many ways. We have air conditioning, we have lights, we have plumbing, we drive our cars. You really don't have to exert yourself in many cases. And for many jobs, unless you're working construction or some manual labor job, you can go through life with minimal physical exertion, right? But we choose to do this, right? I think, and it gives us an opportunity to make ourselves more resilient in a world that doesn't do that unto its in of itself.
yeah, the beauty of bodybuilding.
Yeah. So, if everyone has their choice. Like if you just want to have someone take you to the top of Mount Everest, that's fine. Flying up there, badass pictures. You get your selfie, you put on your dating site, whatever you're going to do, you know, or you can be the person who climbed it, right? And maybe you don't post it, tell anybody about it, but you
Wow.
did it and you know you did it, right? And you can tell other people how to do it. So
Mm.
just about I mean, so many. This, I think, just to even take a step further back, is the thing that I think is the challenge for this is my little perspective here in my little bubble of my little
Armchair,
brain.
armchair
Yeah.
anecdote.
Yeah, well, hopefully not that bad, but yeah, is that in so many ways, the lens through which I view the issues that humanity has as to whether we're going to destroy ourselves or whether we'll still be around in 100, 200, 500 years, come back to our ability to move past or see with a more global perspective to what extent our biology and our evolutionarily derived intuitions, perspectives, psychological tendencies dictate how we behave. And by that, I mean we want sugar, fat, salt. We want to lay around and exert minimal energy. We tend to get pissed off and we us them. We continue to create war and kill each other off, right? We are tribal by nature, and then we have all these other biological instincts that don't behoove us anymore in a modern world. And if we can step back and see, you know what? I really want to eat cheesecake 3 times a day, every day. It's not the best thing for me, right?
It's delicious.
Um, it's so good. I'm sorry. I almost triggered you there with cheesecake's the wrong word. Sorry. Don't say cheesesteak.
I love it.
But and then step back and say, you know what? Like when people piss me off, I want to be angry and lash back at them. But if everyone does that, if I universalize that action, that doesn't make for a better world. Hold myself back. I had to do that this morning on a dog walk, right? I sat there and I was like, I'm really pissed off at the way these people are behaving, but I didn't do anything. I just sat there and I just sort of sat with it. Was very happy afterwards that I was able to do that. Um, anyway, this is an example where I think maybe this will just resonate with one or two people, where people can step back and say, you know what? Now I have a better perspective on why I do this. It's awesome to be shredded and have people look at you like, wow, that person looks amazing, and just to be in that state, right? And GLP-1s get you into that state much more easily. And am I just feeding my brain pleasurable experiences? Is that why I'm using the GLP-1s? Because I have a need for that, an unfulfilled need for that, or um, my brain is somehow deficient in dopamine and I'm trying to feed it dopamine? And am I missing out on all the things we talk all about, the intrinsic value, the intrinsic rewards that can come with a more difficult challenge and overcoming that? Um, and just knowing that, being able to step back and say, you know, so what am I? Am I robbing myself of something here in using these? And if someone says, you know what, I'm going to do this the hard way, and that's okay. You know, I've known natural competitors who get on stage and tested competitions, and they're like, ah, whatever. They don't care. They just want to compete with the people that are as good as possible. And it doesn't matter that someone has an unfair advantage, quote unquote, or an advantage that they haven't taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder as well,
aware of
actually,
that.
if
Hmm.
the mental health connotations to, I mean, even like your example of, not going to the gym when you're not using gear. And we've spoken about this plenty over our friendship, where you can utilize something, whether that's the PDs, whether that's the GLP-1, whatever it is, when you come off cycle, when you come off, and dealing with that. Essentially, could we see more of that body dysmorphia as we've touched on as well? Maybe we go into periods of time where we recluse, like you've described, with when you come on and off cycle. You know,
Hmm.
is that, I feel like that's almost like the missing part to this, because the people I see using it, the people I hear talking about it, they're like, oh yeah, I just want to use it to get to X weight or X stage or whatever.
Hmm.
I don't believe there's much thought into, okay, so when you come off it and you haven't got those eating patterns and what you're going to look like off the back of it, there's a short-term gratification, essentially, is what I'm saying. There's some
Hmm.
mental health implications off the back of that as well.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, like there's some couple papers looking at things like metabolic rate after The Biggest Loser TV
Yeah,
show, for instance, that are pretty interesting,
very
and
popular.
highly variable success there. Some people stick with things, but with the Biggest Loser, and that was like, super crash diet, artificial circumstances, like the whole world is watching you, right? Like you have all this artificial pressure supporting your drive, like you have to do these things, everyone's looking at you, potential shame and guilt if you don't do what your trainer said. You came in, did you cheat on your diet? It's a very special set of circumstances where you're under the microscope, and then afterwards, like, okay, now go and try to figure out how to do this on your own.
See ya, have some money, bye.
Yeah, right, right. And there's a similarity between that and the GLP-1s, because you have this assistance that lets you get down to your goal body weight, your goal body fat, let's say. But you didn't develop those patterns, those habits, which can be your friend or your enemy,
Mm.
depending on if you've developed them consciously or they've just developed unconsciously.
Yeah.
And those things, if they're not in place, just then what are you left with?
Mm.
That would, I hope, there are some studies where they followed weight. Like I said, I think I mentioned before, they followed weight gain. It does reverse afterwards when you come off the GLP-1, as you would expect,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Because the main mechanism seems to be appetite suppression. It's not like there's some permanent residual effect or they don't have some super long half-life. Um, but I wouldn't be surprised. What I think will happen is that this will just be persistent prescription use. People will just stay on them. And then what will happen is then there will be ancillary drug use to combat the side effects.
Yeah.
Um, I hate to say it, but I suspect that it will be pharmaceuticals as opposed to hope there will be some naturopathic physicians, for instance, alternative medicine practitioners, DOs maybe will be more inclined to do this, but Western allopathic physicians don't typically get much nutrition education, if any at all, in their training. So it'll take some time, but when people start showing up with nutrient deficiencies and when that gets directly studied, then hopefully those things will be added on. But I mean, like the example that pops in my head is, there's prescription fish oil now,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. One of the I forget the name of the brand name, but there's a fish oil that's been tested in the research literature, and now it's a prescription, right? You can get good fish oil without a prescription,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But what I see happening is like there will be a prescription vitamin mineral supplement that goes alongside that you would take
Oh,
with
mm.
semaglutide, Wegovy, or what have you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that will come into play, I think, at some point in time. But what this essentially does to some degree is it robs people. Let me take this back a little bit, or step back a little bit. There are people who just have a genetic predisposition for obesity, which is like almost nearly insurmountable. There is a use case for GLP-1 agonists for some people, without a doubt, right?
For sure.
There's, super amazing levels or incredible levels of obesity that have just such a strong genetic predispositions. Like this is the time where these prescriptions would make sense, just because people will live better lives and it'll increase their life expectancy.
Yeah.
But for people who have just, gained the 20 pounds since they're in high school to when they're in their mid 40s, and this could be easily reversed with diet and exercise, getting on GLP-1 agonists that do that for them, which they then become dependent upon, robs them of their autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're taking autonomy, you're taking individual choice away from people
Mm.
because, I mean, obviously they still have free will. If you believe that free will exists, that's a whole other topic, but they still have, technically it's like no one's forcing them to take these drugs. But psychologically speaking, because they work so well, like it's pretty well known that this is how this is how drug dealers in the back alley work, right? It's like, hey, you need to pick. You see somebody like the drug. It's like this classic, stereotypical example. The drug dealer sees somebody who's down and out. It's like, hey, brother, you need to pick me up. How you doing, man? He's like, yeah. It's like, I got something for you. Try. You're just, free. Here you go, free charge, right? They take the drug. They feel awesome. They're like, then they go back down, they spiral back down. It's like, oh, I give you some now, but I gotta charge you for this one, and they give them the drug and they start on it, right? And then the person becomes dependent upon the drug. They become addicted, quote unquote, right? It's not exactly the same, but people go to doctors who are ill-equipped to do diet and exercise prescription. They only have the pharmaceutical armament available to treat this.
Mm.
And then that's the only option,
Mm. Mm.
right? And then that person becomes then dependent upon that because they don't know any other way out of it. And plus, because it worked, they feel good, right? They're good to go.
Mm.
And we don't have, it's like, oh God, there's so many analogies. We've seen all this shit before. This has happened so many times. Smoking,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I've known people, family member included, for instance, who thought smoking was more addictive than heroin.
Oh.
And part of that, and this is just total layperson's perspective here, but part of that I've heard numerous times from people who've used all the hard drugs is that smoking, not so much more, but in the past was considered very socially acceptable.
Yeah, for sure.
You can go and smoke, right? If you're like, oh, hold on just a sec, I gotta go, inject it.
You
People
want
are
to go
like,
hide?
you go to that, I'll see you later. Like never,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you're a drug addict.
Mm.
But someone goes outside and smokes a cigarette, like you don't go
Yeah,
outside nice restaurants and see people shooting up, crack,
yeah, yeah.
but smoking is socially acceptable. So that makes it very, very difficult to quit.
Mm.
Just that. And it also means that you continue to do it year in and year out. And then whatever is changing, and this is what, who knows what's going on with GLP-1s, there's probably some restructuring in the brain that's going on. Because that's where these are acting, right? They're
Mm.
acting on receptors throughout the body, but they're acting also on the brain and the appetite regulatory regions. So you do that over time, and just like any drug, there's an adaptation to the drug, right? So now that person's brain has restructured itself in terms of appetite regulation around the chronic use of an appetite suppressant.
And they create
You
a need.
They need it to keep their appetite in control.
Yeah.
Just like you take someone who's been using a very socially acceptable drug like nicotine,
Mm.
they've been doing it for years. Their brain has literally reconstructed itself around the nicotine being there, having its actions on the neurons. And then you take that out after 20 years, they're fucked for a long time, right? Well, they go back.
Mm.
And this is even like the way this is coming across now, it's even more socially acceptable than nicotine, right? At least at this point. But nicotine used to be, they used to prescribe nicotine for things, right? Like for your, for breathing difficulties, have some menthol cigarettes. It'll open your lungs right up, right? Not That's not the case anymore. I don't know. I'm not saying that GLP-1s are going to be. There is like some evidence that potentially of thyroid cancer from one study, but other than that, we don't really know.
Mm.
But who knows what's going to happen? But right now, they're just socially acceptable. People are like they're talking about like, "Ooh, are you on that? You on?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We get, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, like in the cafe, like they're having a coffee and talking about it. I always,
yeah.
but it's just sprung to mind as well. Two things actually to pick your brains on from the psychological, dependency and the need, essentially what we're talking about there. It's just come into my mind. So, as I say, two different examples of people that struggle with binging off the back of
Mm,
potentially behaviors built around bodybuilding, perhaps in the post-show period, maybe in the off season, perhaps they kept it in check in the prep, and there's a food disorder behind that. And also in the realms of anorexia and wanting more to be able to suppress that even more and come away from the guilt of feeling hungry sometimes. The food pathology
hmm.
realm as well. We could be seeing it utilized there, I would say. Also, it's just sort
Yeah,
of come to my mind as you're talking, which is it is very upsetting.
yeah, yeah. The potential for quote unquote abuse
Yeah.
with susceptible individuals is pretty high, I think. Right? Imagine someone with anorexia nervosa, right? That's real. I mean, those people who will die, they will just starve themselves to death, like literally. Someone give this. I mean, this is again just hand waving here. I have a friend. I probably should ask her about this. Who's worked with some. She's a therapist. She's worked with some people with eating disorders. But imagine someone is just heading down that pathway. You know about this, right? They're in that where they're starting to develop disordered eating.
Yeah.
It's going towards a full-blown eating disorder. And they get a hold of this substance. It's like, oh yeah, now I cannot eat for a week and I don't even notice it,
Yeah.
right? That could just be like instead of spiraling down the stairway, you're throwing them down the thing.
For sure. For sure.
Right? I could totally see this. So, and we've got plenty of disordered eating amongst bodybuilders. So that's a concern. Like this is you're playing with fire. There's lots of potential, especially for people who are, heading in that direction. And then this is something that would love to see studied. But I like, and we sort of alluded to this already, is if you have individuals who are maybe desperate. They've tried things, they haven't been able to stick to exercise, or are of a certain, there's a certain mindset, I would imagine, of people who are going to just want to reach for the magic bullet.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend the other night, and she was telling me this sort of thing is what she's seen is that people just take it and they don't think about it. And this is why I think, what we're talking about right now is so important. And that's so it's not as if basically the people who would tend to run into problems with using and dependency, so to speak, on GLP-1 agonists are of course going to be the ones who are going to go to them.
Yeah.
So it's more dangerous for them than for the average person.
Mm. Mm.
Um, that's the thing, like, bodybuilding drugs, there are people that have used gear and they come off gear and they have no problem.
Yeah.
There are people that drink alcohol,
Yeah.
right? And it's a matter of perspective. Some people and they do it and they're just basically fine. Like they maybe get a little tipsy here and there, but they're we use function alcoholic, but there are people that just drink on a regular basis and it really has no impact
Yeah.
on their ability to live their life. They don't say things they wouldn't say. It doesn't ruin their relationships. It's no problem. And then there's the other end. So this is something, won't say it's addictive in the way that nicotine is or that alcohol could be, but it's something that can put people in a state of dependency because it's their sense of self and self-esteem that could be dangerous for some people.
Mm.
So it's worth knowing, that it almost, I hate to say it this way, but it's true. You're doing a bit of a deal with the devil
Yeah.
when
This.
it comes to this
Yeah. Yeah.
because it works. They work so well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they're gonna have to pay
that,
the piper, potentially.
yeah, yeah, that's going to bring the addictive nature as well. And I do feel like, when you are in the disordered realms, and if we give binging as the example, the
Mm,
guilt and shame that's associated off the back of a binge while you're doing it, a lot of the time from when I, have guests on or I speak to people that have come through it or are still very much in it when you're doing it,
mm,
it's this massive overhaul of it's not necessarily even conscious, as it were, to sort of describe a binge, as it were. However, off the back of it, the guilt and shame, the potential self-restriction, etc. So if someone is of this nature and they think, actually, I could take this and then I won't binge, I won't get the guilt and shame, I won't, put on weight, da, 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 da. Okay, that's my magic cure. And then you've got that realm of, so would you prefer the person to be binging or the person to have
mm-hmm.
LP1? And there's so many, I mean, we could talk for hours about examples like that. But again, it's like you get, and I've had this before with a guest where he said, I'd rather an anorexic recovering be a bodybuilder than be an anorexic that's not recovering. There's almost these double
Yeah,
swords of like,
lesser of two evils.
yeah, where do you head? Because
Mm-hmm.
maybe the coach or the person themselves are thinking, well, this will help me stop binging, but you're not getting rid of the problem, are you? You're masking it essentially by using another compound. And then, as you say, it's a deal with the devil, isn't it? Rather than potentially seeing a psychiatrist, gaining additional help to deal with the food disorder, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this is the way I understand one effective way to use antidepressants is you bring the person out of that depressed state, which is kind of a catch-22. They don't care enough to do something for themselves,
Yep.
right? So you get them to the point where they care enough while they're having therapy. Then they get a new perspective. They resolve their issues. I mean, it's not an overnight process, obviously.
That's the other
Um,
thing. It takes time.
and so it allows them to do that, and then they don't need the antidepressants anymore because you've gotten to the point you can fix the issue,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, I can see an analogous case again. No therapist here, but if someone has these binges and they're in this binge and purge cycle, right? And you could use something like a GLP-1 agonist to take them out of that binge and purge cycle
Mm.
so that they have clarity of mind and working with a therapist and doing all the things they need to do to remedy the underlying cause of that to the extent that can be done. Then you don't have the cause anymore. The binge, you don't have to use the GLP-1 agonist, and the binge and purges won't be there. I mean, in an ideal
Oh,
situation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think that could be something that again people are going to look for. Let's face it, Scott. People are desperate. in the food disorder realm. People are desperate.
Hmm.
They want the magic cure because it's fucking uncomfortable when you've got these things going on. And I feel for anyone in the depths of any food disorders or pathologies, etc. And I've had multiple things over my time as a bodybuilder. I'm happy to admit that. And it's very
Right.
dark, it is very dark. And there's so many cases where there could be that gives me some hope. However, like we're describing there, and that's what I wanted you to say as well, and I'm glad you did. I thought you would. It's about addressing the issues as well, having
Yeah.
seeking help as well, not just going, I'll take the GLP-1, it will stop me binging, then I'll be fine. Because as
Hmm.
you can hear in this episode, you know, it's about the therapy, depending on what route you need to go down, whether it's a psychiatrist. A lot of these things, can be helped by talking and seeking support. However uncomfortable and how much time it takes, that is often, where people find that difficulty in going, oh, well, it's going to take X amount of time. But for sure, you reap the
Hmm.
rewards for the rest of your life rather than dependency on one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. You're actually rerouting and understanding yourself more, very much like the bodybuilding journey.
Yeah. Like to tie that together with some other things we talked about, there's a middle way that we're not very good at least in Western society. And we're not very good at it with bodybuilding. It's like all or nothing. We're not very good at it with Western medicine, where, for instance, instead of taking the full dose, there's a dose response association between the GLP-1 agonists. The higher doses, would give a larger response. Where, for instance, a physician, let's maybe a naturopathic physician or someone who does nutritional consultation, works with a nutritionist, would say, here's what we want to do. You have a history of, just think about the layperson, history of failing. You go on um, uh,
Yeah.
your your yo-yo dieting back and forth all the time. And when it gets really kind of hungry, you tend to just have Ben and Jerry's binge, maybe not with the purge, but you just can't stick to things. So you have this poor history of continually to fail. You need a little support, right? Every time you get in the pool, you swim and swim, and then you start to drown and you like freak out and like have to get out of the pool. Let's give you some floaties
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
you can get some time and practice swimming without drowning. So you give someone a lower dose and you couple that with swimming lessons with the dietitian,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
To show
yeah.
them how to change their appetite. And now they have some support and they're like, and they develop the self-efficacy. And they're like, I got this shit. I can do this. It's going to get harder, but I've been a little bit hungry. I know what it feels like to be a little bit hungry. Let's take my small dose and have that and see how I do for a week.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. I got this. Maybe you have to, slowly titrate down on those sorts of things. Bodybuilding too. Like there could be the middle way. Like maybe for some people, they realize that they're highly susceptible for that week or two after the show, so they decide to do. Okay, well, let's do this. First of all, your coaching with me doesn't end after like the day of the show. You're
Yes, yes,
you're
yes, yes,
you're
yes, yes. Repeat
yes.
that again. Repeat that
Your,
again.
your, your coaching with me doesn't end the day of the show. We're going to stick together for X number of weeks afterwards and get you out of that post show rebound place where things just go to hell sometimes, right? Right? So I'm going to be there for you. We're going to reverse diet out in a sane way. We're maybe going to have some controlled, quote unquote, better, larger meals. We can call them cheat meals,
Yeah.
social meals, enjoyable meals, right? And in this case, hopefully we won't need it, but we'll have on reserve a GLP-1 agonist if you start to feel like, wow, I'm getting really kind of pretty hungry here.
Yeah.
Um, and you work your way through until you get back to a normal level of body fat or closer to it, where your appetite. Then you have that as the floaty. It's like sometimes it's what it's like. Easy example. It's like you're in the gym and someone's spotting you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And like you can get more reps knowing they could be there sometimes. Like it
I
feels like the
swear.
bars, they don't even touch it. The bars, like everyone's experienced that. You're like, yeah, of course, it's such a bizarre thing, but it happens, right? So you got that coach there. It's like, hey, we have this if we need it. And you're like, oh, okay. And now you're reassured that the hunger is, you're not going to spiral down that pathway and have a binge because we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm with you. So that's a middle way potential use case.
Mm,
where you maybe you don't even use it, right? Or you keep it on hand, and potentially use it if needed.
mm.
So, not that I'm suggesting people use drugs illicitly
But
without
it's
prescriptions,
another,
right?
yeah, it's an
Yeah.
expectation. This is the thing, I'd imagine there's going to be a fair few people that listen, and this is why I construct the podcast the way I do, that are going to think very negatively of GLP-1. However, I think it's important to actually then, it's a really nice way that we've actually gone through it, and we're sort of
Hmm.
wrapping up with actually there could be some cases to use it. But
Yeah.
again, when it's like shaming foods, isn't it? Oh, that food's a load of shit, and then they eat it when they want to, but it's
Right. Right.
it's the
Forbidden
whole,
fruit.
yeah, it's the whole, labeling of things. And I think that, it's a really nice way to do it because it's thought provoking as well, and that's important for me, as you know, for the podcast. It's not just,
Hmm.
it's not always people sometimes listen to an episode and they're like, that triggered me a bit there, and I'm like, why? Go inside,
Hmm.
let's understand yourself more, let's thought provoke and understand these things. And also, what I love about the conversation we've just had there is that, remember, you might have a friend that is in one of those scenarios, the trickier scenarios that we've just
Hmm.
touched on there. They might need your help and support, guys, because we can often throw shade on people and forget what it feels like to be desperate.
Yeah.
Again, it's important to sometimes offer a level of understanding rather than just banish that person from your life if they are someone dear in your life. And perhaps you can actually help them with even something we've spoken about here of a lesser dose, or different things, rather than
Hmm.
just go, that's a load of shit, and ban them from your life. So, again, thought provoking things for the listeners as well, which is super important.
Yeah, I mean, in the bodybuilding world, let's take the guy on gear, right? And you're like, hey, dude, you're killing yourself. You're using way too much stuff. Like your skin looks awful. Like your liver values are screwy. It's like, let's do this, man. Let's drop your dose down. To something like it's not all or nothing. It's like I'm not going to abandon you and have no empathy and tell you to go to hell because you're killing yourself. Let's try to get you down to some degree. I mean, there are use cases where you need to do an intervention. The person just needs to be stopped cold turkey, right? That can happen. But that's having the empathy of and this is a basic principle of help of a helping profession that I picked up on years ago. Is you need to start where the person is, right? So we're probably going to be coaches listening who've got clients who've been on GLP-1
Yeah,
agonists, and they're like, "This is awesome,
yeah,
right? This got me where I'm at." It's like, okay, good. So ask yourself the question: Are you okay using this for forever? Then that's a personal. Like some people are fine with that. That's where they're going to be. So let them be. Decide whether you're going to work with them or not. But if they're like, "No, I really don't like having to go and pay. It's kind of expensive, or I just don't like the potential for side effects. What can we do about this?" So you start where the person is, right? And because if you come from too far, out of left field,
Ah,
then you will lose people, and you can't help them in many cases when you do that. So, yeah, that's a very important message that you just put forth there.
yeah, it is.
Super
It's
important.
when
Yeah.
these things are available, we all do things in life, Scott. We've done them. Everyone does things where you think,
Mm,
bloody hell, that was an era. Or, you
yeah.
make decisions based on peer pressure or whatever it is. We've spoken about the chats in the calf and all of these things. And we do make the wrong decisions sometimes. But like with bodybuilding, you can only learn, and it's about the evolution of oneself. And that can be with or without a tribe of people around you. And it's important to, as you say, there's such a clear message there. Meet people where they're at sometimes, and let yourself just think about the
Hmm.
person you're speaking to, and that's important. I knew this
Yeah.
episode would be so good, bestie. Oh,
Yeah. One thing too about having loving yourself and allowing yourself to make mistakes is the thing that I've just turned to saying in the last few years now is things are only mistakes if you fail to take on the opportunity to learn from them. So everything's a learning opportunity,
for sure.
right? If you don't learn from it and keep doing it, it's like maybe that was a mistake. But you can take what was a mistake, quote unquote, 10 years ago
Yeah,
and make it not a mistake if you learn from it today.
yeah,
So people do things that they wouldn't do anymore. If you've been making a mistake now, it's not a mistake. It was a learning opportunity, right? If you can reframe it and then make use of that. That's the thing I think that can happen is you can get in sort of this spiral of feeling ashamed and guilty, and then you hide away.
Yeah.
That's what happens with drug use and alcohol. It's amazing how people can be. You've heard all these stories of people can be addicts and then they hide it so well. It's like what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Um, this is something that, GLP-1s is now you don't even like people don't even care about hiding it, but there will be people who might be ashamed and wish they weren't using it. It's okay to tell people about that if you want to stop using them, right?
Yeah.
And if you're like, wow, look now I thought about this totally differently. I've been making a huge error. It's like, it's not an error unless you continue to do it, right? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
yeah. Yeah.
it's like my hand's on the stove and it's hot. I'm burning my hand. Okay, I'm not going to do that again. I learned, right? But if you keep your hand oh, my hand's burning. Oh, my skin's burning. That smells really
That
bad.
was
Oh, now
great.
my
Yeah.
bone is on fire. That's a continuing this continual mistake
Give me the
until you
pen.
remove your hand. Now you learn, right? But don't keep making the mistake. It's only a mistake unless you don't learn from it.
And to extend from that as well, and now we're on this little path. I love our path of wisdom, as it were. But as well, as we say, meet people where they're at. I often see this. You can be driven so much by ego or your achievements in the bodybuilding space or how far you've come, you forget what it's like when you're in the darkness.
Yeah.
You forget what it's like when you were struggling because you're here now and you start to see, not personally, but I'm very much of the gratefulness vibe and where I'm at, and as are you. But you see this, people start to shit on people when they used to be
Mhm.
there, right? Like, let's have a level of, you know, helping to raise other people up to where you are, or actually giving a shit and giving them a voice as well. And I know that's a big ask for the universe, Scott, but
Mhm.
it's a thought process.
I mean, this is the thing I try to say again and again and again because I'm an old school guy, right? I'm been around for a while, and this is what happens very often. People get old. It's like, oh, you kids, you don't know, like this generation. I wish I could. I listened to a talk from an Austrian psychologist just a couple days ago, and he started off by reading a quote, and the quote was something like, "This younger generation has lost respect. They don't respect the elders the way they should, and all blah blah blah." And it's the type of thing that like you would have expected someone to have said last week. Look at this younger generation. They're addicted to their cell phones and all they use is chat GPT all the time, blah, blah, blah. The quote was found on a tablet that was dated 3,000 years ago,
Oh,
three in Babylonia, right?
oh,
It's something that's been said. Oh, it's been said for centuries, right? This is what happens in older generations. We look at the younger generations, we criticize them because they don't behave the way we did, and we don't have empathy for what they're experiencing. And that's the thing I try to have is like, shit, I don't know what I would have done if I came into bodybuilding and it's like, ooh, there's all this stuff I can use to be a better bodybuilder, and I can just take this drug that will get rid of my hunger. Well, hell yeah.
yeah,
I'm
and
doing that shit.
maybe your coach says to use it, or your peers are using it. Yeah, yeah.
Who knows what I would have been? I mean, I think I've told you. We maybe end with this. I'll try to make it quick. My thought experiment. So my thought experiment is this: it helps with empathy, um, and tolerance for others. And there's some complexities here, but just take it on board as it is if you could. So imagine a world now where technology is advanced, where we have cloning and we have time travel. And you want to go and examine the idea of to what extent does nature or nurture influence who we are? In particular, influence who you are. So you want to know how you would be under different circumstances, growing up in a different family, in a different culture, different place. Have I told you about this before?
No,
I
but
don't.
I'd like
Oh, okay.
talking about this
Oh,
the other day.
okay. So this is my thought experiment. I've mentioned this a couple of times on podcasts, and I share it whenever it seems appropriate. So in order to do that, and you realize that you figure out a way to do this without altering the space-time continuum, so you're not going to change the future and have to hire the Flash to go back in the past, whatever. But you go and you find mothers whose children weren't going to be born, and there is a way for you to put a clone of yourself, maybe with modified skin color to match the color of the culture in which that child would be born. And you go back to Babylonia, you go back to Christ's time, you go back to 18th century South Africa, you go to Russia in the 1930s, you go to South America, you go the future, 100 years. You have a time travel device and you have this cloning machine, and you create clones of yourself that grow up at all these different epochs of time in different cultures, different environments. They have no running water. They have no electricity. They grow up like the Siddhartha Gautama did as the Buddha, just extraordinarily rich and sheltered, right? And then you can spring forward in time and observe yourself, maybe even have a conversation with yourself if that version of yourself speaks English, and see who you are. Who would you be if you grew up extraordinarily impoverished and both of your parent, you only had one parent, and that parent was an alcoholic and a drug addict who beat you? Who would you be? Who would you be if you grew up completely spoiled by both of your parents and you got everything you wanted and there was never a challenge and you just did whatever you wanted and you could talk back to them and they just didn't do anything. They just let you, gave everything you wanted. You become maybe a horrible spoiled brat and not a very good person. There's versions of yourself where you could become absolutely extraordinary. So wrap your mind around that. This is for anyone who's listening, who's sticking with me so far in this. And now think about, if you're an older person, this is what I try to do. Who would I be if I were born 20, 30, 40 years later? Who would I be now if I were a 19 or 22-year-old in the bodybuilding space? Who would I be listening to? Would I be using a GLP? Would I be figuring out a way to microdose GLP-1 agonists? Would I be like using some sort of undulating schedule, or would I alternate with my refeeds, or what would I be doing? How would I be strategizing it, right? I would have a very different perspective probably than I do now. So I have to think about that. Like, the older generation, had they been born, it's not that evolution has changed us that much in 40 years. There is no evolutionary pressure essentially. What changes is technology and the generation in which we grow up. The older guys who are complaining about the younger guys who don't have empathy would be just like the younger guys if they'd been born 40 years later. There'd be no difference, but it's a hard thing to have that shift in perspective. It's a paradigm shift. So that little thought experiment, if you think that through, it's like, oh my God, I could be an absolute asshole, or I could be a much better person than I am now, and everything in between.
Yeah, well,
So
yeah. I
yeah,
love that. We had to finish it on some sort of analogy
yeah,
because that's how we do. Imagine if people heard
that works.
our voice notes. We love them.
Oh, I know.
I love it.
Podcasts, podcasts galore in those.
Thank you so much,
You're
Bestie.
welcome. You're
What
absolutely welcome.
and so nice to see your face and to connect
Yes,
as always.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I will put your Instagram in the description as
Mm,
normal. Obviously you're on some other podcasts at the moment and various other things, and then you've
hmm
book which you've mentioned. Scott is one of the OGs, and no one is Scott, is what I'm gonna. That's what I'm gonna
Well,
say.
hopefully I am. There's got to be at least me.
I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure, as always.
See you later.
Adios.
Bye.